Okay, so why don't you introduce yourself?
Right. So my name is Dan Norton. I have a YouTube channel and I advance Ayn Rand's philosophy of objectivism. And if you want to find my channel, you can go to youtube.com/Dan Norton1, or you could also search for Selfishness Project. It's an easy way to find my channel. I have a lot of videos on the topic of selfishness. So
Cool. Let's pass it a
I'll
link.
do for yeah, I could put a link in the chat, or maybe you could do that later.
I did that.
Okay.
There is a link in my chat, and my two viewers have seen it and are no doubt clicking on it now. Okay, cool. Um, so yeah, you wanted to talk about some stuff. What was it? It was basically, well, why don't you remind me?
Okay, so yeah, we just uh, DM'd a little bit through Discord, and there were two topics that came up. So one was anarchism, and the other was the how can you get normative facts from descriptive facts? So I had asked you if there's any points in Ayn Rand's philosophy that's disagreements with that you might want to talk about, and those were the two that came up.
Yeah.
So yeah, we can
Right.
talk about either or both of those.
So what? Okay. So yeah. So Ayn Rand believes in objective morality, and do you think you could like give me like I'm not super, I'm not definitely not an expert on that, but I've read a little bit about it. Do you think you could sort of summarize, like how where objectivism sees morality as coming from and what makes it objective?
Yeah, I could say some about that. So Ayn Rand bases her morality on the fact that values presuppose life. So she finds objectivity and morality by asking this question: what gives rise to the whole field of values? She doesn't start in the sphere of ethics by asking which ethics should we accept. Should we be egoists? Should we be altruists? Should we be utilitarian? Should we be Kantians? Which ethical system is correct? Because that's not the right way to approach ethics. Rather, you should just ask, why do we need ethics at all? What gives rise to the entire field of ethics? And the answer she comes to is the fact of life. Life is it's a fundamental, there's a fundamental alternative we face, life or death. And it's because we face this alternative that
By life you
such
mean,
things
just to be
as
clear, by life you mean staying alive, surviving, literally.
uh yeah, so any living organism, a plant, an animal, a human being, faces the possibility of going out of existence. So any organism has to take certain actions in order to keep itself in existence. A plant has to get water, sunlight, food. Animals have to get some kind of nourishment. Humans have to get certain kinds of nourishment. Every organism has to take some kind of action in order to keep itself in existence. And if it does not take those actions, if it doesn't take the right kind of actions, it will go out of existence. It will die.
Sure.
So life is conditional. We're not guaranteed we're going to stay alive. It's conditional on our taking certain actions. And in Rand's view, that's what gives rise to the whole sphere of ethics or morality, science of figuring out what it's good to do. If we didn't face this alternative of life or death, if we didn't face the possibility of going out of existence, if we were just guaranteed to stay in existence, then there would be no need to pursue values, to go after things like food, shelter, clothing, medicine, technology. They wouldn't do us any good because we'd just be guaranteed existence. But because we're not like that, because life is conditional and are taking certain kinds of actions. Therefore, we do pursue values to achieve that goal of staying in existence. So
And when you
she
say
ties,
surviving, you mean surviving for like the longest time? Because we're all, I mean, we don't, we die eventually. And
yeah, at least given present technology, who knows? Maybe in the future we will become so advanced that we can just live on and on and on, and it will be up to us when we choose to die. I'm not sure, but yeah, at least right now, and we have seen increased life expectancy, like from caveman days, where average lifespan maybe was 20, 30 years. Now average life expectancy is up to over 70 or maybe 80 in some places. The more advanced we get, the better we can get at survival. But
right, so living as long as possible.
it's not just an issue of length, because I mean, if you're living, like if you've got some terminal cancer or something that causes you to be in extreme pain, maybe there's a way that you could extend your life for many years living in that state, but it might not be worth it. Only certain kinds of life are worth sustaining. And if a life of happiness, for instance, if you can sustain that, then sure, why not just keep going on? Maybe it gets boring at some point, but so long as you're living a happy life, then there's reason to continue trying to keep that going.
Okay, so already I'm a bit confused because if life is not always worth living, then it would seem that living is not the most fundamental value, right?
Well, it's living in a certain way, or living. Uh, uh, she uses certain phrases like life as a rational being. Um, Happiness also figures in here, so happiness is part of a life worth living. So maybe you could think of it as a happy life is the thing worth sustaining, not sheer existence. Like even if you're a cancer patient in pain, in that case, it might be a good idea to commit suicide because it's just not worth staying alive.
Okay, so it sounds like being alive is a means to some other end, because it's, I mean, I guess you have to be, it's a necessary, like being alive is a necessary condition to whatever it is that is valuable, but not sufficient, because you can't just be alive, you got to be alive and somewhat happy or whatever else. So what is what is the end that you're actually, that life, being alive is a means to? What is it that makes your life worth living?
She says happiness is the purpose of life, but she's also said in certain places that life is an end in itself. So it's not pursued for something beyond itself, it's pursued for its own sake. I think when she says things like that, she includes happiness as part of life. So when she says life is an end in itself, I think she has a certain conception of what life means there. So I think it would include something like happiness. And it would be,
What does it
I
mean?
think, what does what mean?
What does life mean? If not, it doesn't, if it doesn't just mean being alive, it means being alive and happy or something. What, like, can you define what it means? Like, what is happiness? What does that mean?
Uh, okay, so you have to, what does life mean, and then also what does happiness mean? Um, so she does offer definitions, or at least descriptions of each of those. So in one place, she describes life as process of self-sustaining, self-generated action. And as for happiness, she describes that in one place as a state of non-contradictory joy, as opposed to um, satisfaction of some whim of the moments, where you might get some momentary pleasure, but it's in contradiction with your long-term self-interest. She wouldn't regard like um, getting drunk, or getting taking heroin or something that gives you some momentary pleasure, that's not necessarily part of happiness if it's going to make you worse off later on, but a state of non-contradictory joy that doesn't conflict with your overall life, that would be happiness.
How do you measure whether something is whether some happiness is contradictory or not? Like there's, you know, most things that you enjoy have some kind of cost that you may have to pay at some point, and it can't be that, unless you're saying that the only things that can make you truly happy are things that have no cost. That doesn't seem right. So it's presumably some sort of cost is worth paying for happiness. But how much? But what is the cost? How do you know whether something is non-contradictory?
Well, it takes thought. It's not always obvious what's in your interests. So you have to think about the consequences of your actions. So maybe
sure, but what am I
right
thinking
now,
about?
if you're
Like, to think about it,
Yeah,
I need
so
to
like,
know what the criteria are that I'm thinking about, right?
so for example, if you're a student in college and you've got a test the next day, um, and let's say you need to study to do well on that test, get a good grade, but you also have an opportunity to go out and party, you know, night before the test. Now, if you don't think about it, you might just act on your whim and don't really consider the consequences. So you might go to the party and then you end up suffering by getting a lower grade, and that puts a black mark on your transcript, and then that makes it harder to career you want, perhaps. So you have to think through the consequences of your actions in terms of, you know, what are the long-term effects on your life going to be. And then you just decide, well, overall, is doing X seem like it's going to benefit me, or is it going to harm me? And that requires thought, which it's up to us to do or not do. And
Well, to
in Rand's
decide,
view, it's good to do that thing.
but in deciding whether it has a net benefit to you, what am I measuring that net benefit in? Like a net benefit
Okay.
of what?
Guess maybe you could think of it in terms of your, I guess, ultimately happiness.
But you said happiness is you're only happy if something has a net benefit. So, like, something's only making you happy if it's net benefit. So you can't use happiness to answer the question of whether it has a net benefit, right?
I'm not sure I get what you're saying, but happiness is the purpose in her view, but she says if is the standard, so she distinguishes between the standard of morality and the purpose of morality. I don't know if this is relevant to what you're asking, but some conception of what your long-term self-interest consists in. So maybe it's, you have a passion for being an engineer, say, and you thought about this goal and what it's going to take to achieve it. Maybe to give it a little more specificity.
What does it mean to have a passion to be an engineer? Does it just mean that you find it fun to be an engineer?
That's part of it, but I think if you think of it as a career, then you see it as something that's sustaining your life. So it does have it is giving you some kind of emotional satisfaction. Presumably, if you want to go into this career, you think it's something you would enjoy. But hopefully,
like you keep going from like happiness to emotional
satisfaction
satisfaction to survival and everything, but we're kind of jumping around, going around, and I want to boil it down to some sort of value. This is the fundamental thing that is valuable, and the other things are means to this fundamental end, right?
Right. This issue is tricky. I found to get clear on it. I wouldn't say I'm entirely clear on it myself, so maybe that's why it's not coming across very clearly. But she says things like life is the ultimate value. She also says happiness is the highest purpose. Now, if you see those two statements, you think like they're in conflict? Does it sound like on one hand she's saying life is the primary thing we're going after? On the other hand, it seems like she's saying happiness is the primary thing we're going after. Are those two contradictory views? I think some people might. She is being contradictory in that way. Like, make up your mind. Is it life or is it happiness that we're ultimately going after? But I think that's those are being pulled apart too much. Like, happiness, as she construes it, I think is an aspect of a successful life. Um, Maybe I should find. There's a certain passage in her article, "The Objectivist Ethics," where she discusses the relationship between life and happiness, and that might. Oh, here it is. Maybe this will provide some clarity. So, right, this is paragraph 76. If anyone has the essay, "The Objectivist Ethics," which I think is probably find it online for free somewhere. She says, quote, "The maintenance of life and the pursuit of happiness are not two separate issues. Hold one's own life as one's ultimate value and one's own happiness as one's highest purpose, two aspects of the same achievement. Existentially, the activity of pursuing rational goals is the activity of maintaining one's life. Psychologically, result, reward, and concomitant is an emotional state of happiness. It is by experiencing happiness that one lives one's life in any hour, year, or the whole of it. When one experiences the kind of pure happiness that is an end in itself, the kind that makes one think this is worth living for, one is greeting and affirming in emotional terms the metaphysical fact that life is an end in itself." Unquote. Well, I think she, to put it slightly in other words, happiness is the psychological aspect of living, in terms of which we experience life as an end in itself. So it's an aspect of living. I think that's
But it's possible to be living and not happy, right?
well, maybe in a sense of living. Like, I was just thinking about that earlier today. Like, sometimes we say, well, you haven't really lived until, and then fill in the blank with some, you've had a certain kind of experience which is really satisfying. There's a certain sense of living where it's just bare survival, like you're in existence in some sense. But there's another kind of fuller, richer, deeper sense of living where it is more, does include something like happiness. If you're just doing cellular metabolism, if you're like in a coma or something, you haven't gone out of existence, but are you really living?
Well, I don't know,
I mean,
because she's
sense,
kind of vague. I don't understand what she means by living. If not, like, she's either saying you're only living when you're happy, you're only really living when you're happy, in which case happiness is the only thing that matters. You're just, because if you're not happy, then you might as well not be alive. But then she says that happiness has something to do with living. Happiness is like the feeling you get when you're living, which just seems like a circular definition, right? But you're only living when you're happy. So yeah, that's what I don't understand. It seems like she's trying to avoid hedonism. She's trying to avoid just saying like, the happiness is just a feeling, and the fundamental value is just to feel a lot of happiness, however way you can. But it seems like she's trying to avoid saying that. But I don't know what else, what alternative she's providing. You're saying like, just saying happiness is something you feel when you're truly alive, and you're only truly alive when you're happy, right?
Yeah, I think that's right.
But that's circular. That doesn't explain anything.
Well, I don't know that it's circular. It's something is circular when you're using something to justify self. I don't know that there's a relation of justification there. There's some kind of relation there that if you're only happy if you're alive, and you're only fully alive if you're happy, but not really a claim being made, at least in that kind of formulation. That
Well, she's saying that happy, like you're happy because you're alive. But what if you're happy for? That's not true, because you can be alive and not happy. So what if you're happy because you're taking a lot of heroin, right? Which most people consider not really a good thing, but it does make you happy. So how does objectivism explain why heroin happy is not really happy?
Well, I think this gets to the issue of being long range. So look at the full consequence of taking that heroin.
Because you're going to be unhappy later.
Well, you're going to suffer consequences later. I don't think she would. I don't think myself that, not that I have experience personally with this, but I don't think it would be right to just count momentary pleasure as happiness. If we're thinking of happiness as this state of non-contradictory joy, I don't think that's something you can just by shooting up moment. I think you need to be doing other kinds of things that integrate better with your long-range well-being.
Why?
In order for it to count as happiness.
But what do you mean integrate better? Like, you are happy when you take heroin, right? Like, people will say, I'm fucking happy.
No. Well, people can say anything.
So what's the difference between that happiness and true happiness? You can't be just saying, you're saying like the true happiness, it's only truly happy if you won't be unhappy later. But how do I measure that if in order to measure that, you have to say that the heroin is making you happy in the moment, but you'll be unhappy later. So at some point you have to boil it down to some actual common thing. How do we compare heroin happiness to some other true happiness unless we can compare them on equal terms, right?
Well, I think you could say the heroin gives you some pleasure.
Yeah.
In the moment, and there is some pleasure involved with happiness as well. So there's that in common. There's also pain that results from heroin, like withdrawal the next day, or
right.
Maybe if you get addicted and all the problems associated with being addicted, and so those are the negative consequences.
So is happiness when you get more pleasure than pain?
Well, I guess maybe that's a necessary condition, but perhaps not a sufficient condition of happiness. If you just get slightly more pleasure than pain, well, yeah, maybe that's part of happiness. But if it's just like a momentary, slightly more pleasurable experience than pain, I don't think that's necessarily happiness. Like for
what's missing?
Happiness, it would. I guess it would. The term long term is coming to mind, like opposed to fleeting. I think happiness is a more.
Why does that matter?
Kind of.
Like, what if I could take heroin and it didn't have any negative side effects, but it didn't last very long? Is that not happy because it's too short?
Didn't have any negative side effects. Would it be happiness?
How long are we talking here?
Sure.
Like, if it lasts like 10 seconds or 1 second, like how long does it have to last? The pleasure have to last for it to be happy?
I don't know that it's the sort of thing which you can just put a time scale on it and say, if it's longer than X, then it's happiness. Otherwise, it's not. I know I said something about it being long term, so um, do I now have some burden to
Yeah.
put a timestamp? That's I don't know. I mean, I think it has something to do with living a long range kind of life, as opposed to just living a whim worshipping kind of life.
But how do I know if I'm whim worshipping? Like, if I really want to be an engineer, because it gives me pleasure to engineer things, right? It's probably why a lot of people want to be engineers. They just, when they do it, they feel good. It's not clear to me that there's any more to any more to enjoying, like, passion for engineering, besides the fact that you experience pleasure when you do it. So is that enough, or is there something that I'm missing about engineering? Does it give you some sort of thing other beyond pleasure, which makes it more authentic, happy?
Well, if we're thinking of it as a career, that would differentiate an engineer from being a heroin taker, like, as if that could be a career. I mean, it's
not fundamentally, right? It only quantitatively, right? I mean, engineering is just a more sustainable way to feel pleasure than taking heroin. But aside from that, it's fundamentally about the same value, just feeling pleasure. Unless, at least, it's not obvious to me why there's any other fundamental difference. Unless, like, if there's some other difference, then what is it?
I mean, I guess if you could achieve the same overall level of pleasure by taking heroin as you could by having a successful career as an engineer, then I guess there'd be no reason to prefer one over the other. I just think the facts of the matter are that you wouldn't be able to achieve the same level of overall pleasure. So I don't know if that addresses what you were inquiring about.
I mean, that sounds like hedonism to me, right? If you're saying that the only reason is that we're fundamentally just looking for pleasure, and the only reason that certain things are considered like healthy forms of, or called like fulfilling or satisfying or whatever, is just because they're more sustainable ways of experiencing pleasure, then that's hedonism, right?
I'm not sure. Thinking of this guy, old Martin Moen, I think he was heavily influenced by objectivism, but doesn't consider himself an objectivist, and maybe because he did go off in this hedonist direction. But I think he argues that hedonism, the sort of hedonism that he advocates, I think, or at least I've heard secondhand, it basically amounts to kind of ethics Rand advocates, but does call himself as a hedonist, and Rand definitely argues against that. So should Rand's view be considered a form of hedonism? I doubt
she would say that, right?
I mean, I was just thinking I could look up the passage where she speaks to hedonism to see if that helps distinguish her view better than I'm doing. So let's see. I was just looking at that.
I'll just read chat here. Okay. Journey started, says taking substances requiring you to be happy is an addiction. Addictions are destructive. Addictions provide an altered perception of reality. Drugs can keep you altering your life habits to avoid disease. Can keep you from altering your life habits to avoid disease. So yeah, but Journey started, all you're saying there is that taking drugs is not a sustainable way to experience pleasure. You're not really explaining why how drugs are different in any other fundamental way from sustainable ways of experiencing pleasure. It's still, what you're describing is still hedonism, or it still doesn't get you out of hedonism.
Okay, so I found the passage. This is paragraph 77. She says, "It is only by accepting man's life as one's primary, by pursuing the rational values it requires, that one can achieve happiness, not by taking happiness as some undefined, irreducible primary, and then attempting to live by its guidance. If you achieve that which is the good by a rational standard of value, it will necessarily make you happy. That which makes you happy by some undefined emotional standard is not necessarily the good. Take, quote, whatever makes one happy, unquote, as a guide to action, as the hedonists do, means be guided by nothing but one's emotional whims. Emotions are not tools of cognition. Be guided by whims, desires whose source, nature, and meaning one does not know, to turn oneself into a blind robot operated by unknowable demons, in other words, one's stale evasions. Robot knocking its stagnant brains out against the walls of reality which it refuses to see. This is the fallacy inherent in hedonism, and any variant of ethical hedonism, personal or social, individual or collective. Happiness can properly be the purpose of ethics, not the standard. The task of ethics is to define man's proper code of values, thus to give him the means of achieving happiness.
I don't understand. If the standard is, if the purpose of ethics is happiness, then the standard should be whatever gives you the most happiness. Why is the standard something different? Like,
I think the way she's understanding standard there is as a guide to action. So it's, if you just think of, I'm going to do whatever makes me happy, that might not provide as much guidance as, say, I'm going to do what helps me to live. If you think of it in those terms, maybe that's a more concrete way of.
Why would? But I don't want to live. I want to be happy. I don't understand.
Okay, but
the purpose is happiness.
The only way to be happy is to think about what's going to further your life.
Well, fine. Then but fundamentally, the standard is to just have the most, experience the most happiness. That's hedonism, right? Hedonism doesn't say that you should only be happy in the next 5 minutes and fuck whatever happens afterwards. It says you should try to experience the most happiness in your life. However, if that means that can mean being, very careful to do things that will allow you to live a long time and experience happiness consistently and sustainably throughout your whole life, that's still hedonism. It's still about the happiness in the end, right? I don't understand how that contradicts anything that Rand is saying here, unless I'm just misunderstanding what she's saying.
Well, maybe what you're saying amounts to saying that she's not interpreting hedonism correctly. Like maybe she's
no, I think she is.
Hedonism.
Well, I think she is, but she doesn't. I don't understand her criticism of it. She's saying you can't just pursue happiness. You have to rationally pursue standard of life, or like I don't understand what that means.
Well, you can pursue happiness, but the way to do it is not by thinking it's going to make me happy. It's by thinking what's going to further my life the best.
What does that mean?
So,
what does further my life mean, other than if it doesn't mean
like keep me in existence, for instance?
But we've established that just existing doesn't matter if you're not experiencing happiness during it. So that's not the issue.
Well, if it's keeping you in existence, if it's not just existing for a moment, but if it's keeping you existence in a way that allows you to have, like being an engineer, which is a sustainable kind of way of it's a way to sustain yourself in existence, not just for the moments.
But there's going to be
So,
choices that will allow you to exist for longer at the cost of some happiness. That's the question. Should you choose to exist longer if you have to compromise on happiness, right? Like, you have
yeah,
some terminal disease, that if you like surgically remove your arms and legs, you could live an extra you could live a little while longer, but you'd be miserable. Or you can just let the disease take its course and enjoy your arms and legs for a slightly shorter length of time for the rest of your life. So you'd have more happiness with the shorter life, or less happiness but a longer life. Which one do you choose?
I sounds like the way you set it up, I would choose the shorter life
Right.
with more happiness, and but I might also add to that uh, longer life is, in a sense, not living. I mean, it goes back to the point I was making earlier. I mean, there's different senses of living.
But I mean,
There's living as just like bare metabolism.
but okay, what
There's
is the
a
sense?
flourishing life.
Like you can't just redefine living to mean happiness. When I try to if living just means happiness, then just call it happiness, right? If it doesn't mean happiness, then
Well,
it's not happiness. Then we
I
have
don't
to
think it
choose between them.
just means happiness. I think living in the full sense that I'm talking about, happiness is an aspect of that, but I don't think it's
What is the thing that I'm
the
trying
total
to
of it.
maximize? What is the fundamental value? That's what I want to know. She seems to say that the fundamental value is happiness, but she's not a hedonist, and I don't
Well, she said
understand because
she says the ultimate value is life. That includes happiness.
I don't know what
It's
she
an
means by
aspect.
life. I don't understand what she means by life. If she doesn't just mean literally being alive, then I don't understand what she means. And she doesn't mean happiness, then what does she mean?
Well, the definition, which I mentioned before, is a process of self-sustaining, self-generated action. So that's a description of what life is. So
So that
if you're
means
asking what does
literally
it
being
mean,
alive. That's like you're not dead.
okay, but I mean, if someone is in existence, I mean, how do we say, like, how do we know whether that person is living or dying? I mean, you might look at the same person and say, oh, well, he's in existence, like a cancer patient or something on a hospital bed. Is that person living or is that person dying? Well, kind of
Well, they're
both,
alive.
right?
They can still act. They can still have self-generated actions.
For a while, yeah, but they're also in the process of disintegrating.
Well, we're all in the process of disintegrating all the time, but but we're alive. She says if she says being alive means self-sustaining, self-generated actions, then you're alive for pretty much right up until you die. Even if you're in pain or miserable or whatever, right? You can still have self-generated actions even if you're suffering. So,
Well, if it's, I mean, some sense. I mean, I think it's. I mean, if you're thinking of, if she's calling life self-sustaining action, and that it's not very it's not sustaining you very much if you're
well, what
few seconds
sustaining?
or
I
minutes.
mean, what does that mean? Self-sustaining.
Well, I mean, just take a simple example. You're eating food, and that keeps you going for
Alive.
another few days.
But she's defining being alive in terms of whether you're keeping yourself alive. That's another circular definition, right?
Uh, it might be. I don't know. Maybe there's some circularity, but sometimes there is non-vicious circularity. I mean, if I think life by its nature is a cyclical kind of thing. You do certain things to keep you alive, and by being alive, you're you're able to do those things. Like I eat, that keeps me in existence. Being in existence allows me to eat some more. Eating more allows me to exist longer.
Okay, well,
Existing longer.
sure,
It's a
but
cycle.
you can do all these things and still be miserable and still have be like not be worth have a life that's so miserable it's not worth living, even though you're still acting and eating and trying to survive and everything. You're still not happy enough to make life worth living. So then why would I care about life per se instead of happiness? Because I can have life, but if I don't have happiness, then then the life isn't even good.
When you say life per se, I think it seems like you're understanding that to mean the non-robust kind of living sense of life.
What do you mean non-robust?
So just cellular metabolism, could be you're in a coma.
Well, no, I mean whatever. I mean what Rand said, like self-sustaining, self-generated actions.
Okay, but I mean maybe that also has different senses. I mean, there's more and less successful ways of trying to sustain yourself. I mean, you could let's say you engage in self-sustaining action by eating a ton of junk food. Well, maybe that can keep you going for a while, but it's also doing some kind of damage to you, so you're not able to sustain yourself as well as if you ate a different kind of
So I'm not alive if I'm eating junk food.
I guess there's degrees here. Maybe you're alive in a sense, but not. Like
I'm less alive.
I really feel alive today. So even though you felt alive on other days, maybe on this particular day, I really feel alive. Well,
why am I? So okay, maybe I'm less alive if I'm putting less effort into surviving. But the problem is, why should I put effort into surviving if I'm not happy? Why should I care about how alive I am, i.e. how hard I'm trying to survive, if I'm not happy? And if I don't, then why should I care about anything but happiness? Because it seems like happiness is the only thing that actually matters in the end. Because without happiness, life doesn't matter. Even if I'm trying really hard to survive, I'm living by her standard, but it's not. But there doesn't be any value in that.
When you say, why should I care about how alive I am? I hear that. I hear that as including a reference to happiness. That's kind of like.
But it doesn't. I'm stipulating that if you're alive but not happy. And I want to know, is that if you're alive but not happy, what is the value of that?
I don't think there is.
Okay, so if there's no value in life without happiness, then it seems like life itself has no value. It's the happiness that makes it valuable.
Okay, but here's the thing again. There's different senses of life. So when you use life in that context, when you're saying there's no value in being alive, if there's not happiness, then you're using life in the just mere metabolism sense.
I'm using it in the sense that does not include happiness.
Okay, if you're using it in that sense, then
because if we're using it in the sense it does include happiness, then you're just. I'm trying to separate happiness from other things so that we can determine whether it's happiness that has the value or something else. So you can't just mush them together and say, well, life is valuable because it's actually it has happiness in it. No, it doesn't. I'm saying if life has no happiness, does it have value? And you seem to be saying no. And that to me says that it is the happiness that provides the value. So it's the happiness that is fundamentally valuable. And that's hedonism.
So when you said I'm mushing things together, I was thinking, like, from my point of view, you're tearing them apart.
Yeah, I'm trying to tear them apart. I'm trying to break it down to figure out where the value is.
Okay.
And when I break it down and say, okay, what about this without this? You say, well, this, yeah, But that actually includes that. No, it doesn't. I'm saying, what about that without that, right? What about life without happiness?
I think there's so if happiness is an aspect of certain kind of life, at least.
What do you mean an aspect of a certain kind of life? You mean you'll be happy if you do certain things? I mean, yeah, obviously. But it's not inseparable from life. You can obviously be alive and not happy.
We're going in circles here.
I guess.
I'm
we're just kind of stuck on this.
Like I'm. Yeah, it's a tricky point, I think, and because my reaction to the last thing you said was just to say something I had already said before, so I'm not sure I should say it again. So
let's try some. We can move on to a different topic. I think what's more interesting to me, a more interesting question, well, a different question is, we've been talking about the morality of like self-interest. What is in your own interest? But what about interpersonal morality, the morality of interacting with other people? What does objectivism say about that? Where do the rules for what we do with other people, how we interact with other people, come from?
Okay, so it's where does it come from? Ultimately, what is in your own self-interest? So your relations with other people should be determined by what's best for yourself. So, for instance, it's not in your own interest. It's not in helping your own happiness or your own life and well-being to treat other people as jerks. Ayn Rand would argue, to physically abuse them. What kind of person is going to want to be your friend, for instance, or your romantic partner if you are a jerk and treat other people like garbage? Probably not going to have very warm, benevolent, enjoyable relationships if you treat others like that. So it's in your interest to treat others in a certain way.
Right. I think that's pretty obvious. Right. But what about, the tricky ones are situations where it seems like we could do something that's in our self-interest, but seems wrong somehow, and we know we could get away with it. And it seems to be in our interest to do it. But it's usually considered wrong, like stealing from someone, stealing some money. Easy, you'll get away with it. They'll never find out. What's wrong with that? Why is that wrong, or is it wrong? I don't know.
Right. Yeah. So with stealing, I think even if no one catches you, in your own minds what you've done and how you've treated another person. Whether you've acted in a way that's just towards others. If you steal others, then do you have any rights? Makes sense for you to think others should treat you any better, or should others be able to steal from you? I think if you trace out the long run consequences, and not just external, but also internal, psychologically, what does it do to your own self-respect, your own self-esteem, to act in this sort of way? I think there you could find some grounds for not stealing, even if you could get away with it, not get thrown in jail.
What if someone has like convinced themselves that a certain kind of theft is justifiable, and let's say it's something that doesn't, like most people would say is wrong, but they've somehow convinced themselves that it's right. They convince themselves that stealing from I don't know, rich people is right, and they're doing it in a way that they can get away with it, so they're never going to get punished, and they're never going to feel like they're not going to feel guilty about it because they believe that it's right. They believe they're doing a good thing. They feel like a good person when they do it. Does that mean, is it still wrong?
I think if you can genuinely say to yourself that I think this is a good thing to do, and you're taking into consideration all the consequences, short term, long term, existential, psychological, if in light of all of that you think it's in your own interest, then I think you should. But I'm pretty skeptical that people could really honestly face all the consequences in that way and decide it is okay. Here's one case where I think it would
seem
be
like
justified.
very far-fetched to me. I'm sure a lot of people do that. I mean, I think I would imagine the average person feels okay about stealing from a lot of people. You know, it's almost conventional morality that it's okay to steal from, say, you know, big corporations or the government, or, you know, so, and it's often possible to do that and get away with it. So it doesn't seem like in those cases it's actually wrong. It seems like if it's not going to hurt them in the long run, and it's not even going to damage them psychologically, or at least they're not going to feel guilty about it, then it's right.
So if you mentioned stealing from corporations, I mean, if you've been raised in a society that's taught you that like corporations are exploitative parasites, and you know the people who own them, they don't really produce any value. It's really the laborers on the assembly line, for instance, who are producing the value. So, you know, some kind of Marxist view. Then you might think that morally the corporation does not have a right to its products. And,
yeah, that's what people think.
But then is it really stealing? Because when you're stealing, you're taking something that rightfully belongs to someone else. But if you think the corporations don't rightfully have what is in their possession, that instead what they have in their possession rightfully belongs to others, like workers, or you're not really stealing. You're taking back what's yours.
Right.
I think that's wrong. But
well, I mean, I'm pretty sure Rand would have considered that wrong.
But she also wouldn't consider it. She also would consider it stealing. But if you're talking about someone who doesn't think it's stealing, right? I don't know if that was part of your example, but it was part of my example. If someone really doesn't think it's stealing, then you know the issue of, I guess this is not a good example of a case where theft is in one's self-interest. It's not really theft, at least from their point of view. So,
well, I guess, but hold on, it doesn't matter whose point. If morality is objective, then it doesn't matter. Then the right or wrong has nothing to do with the point of view, right? I'm pretty sure Ayn Rand would say to those people that what they're doing is wrong, and but I want to know how exactly she would justify that to them. Why is it wrong? Why is it not in their self-interest to do
it? Maybe as part of the explanation she would give is what's in Atlas Shrugged. So a big part of that, I mean, the theme of the novel is the role of the mind in man's existence. And in particular, she talks a lot about the role of the industrialists. So industrialists are not just parasites on their workers. They actually use their minds, and they're extraordinarily good at it. And that's how they're able to produce so much. And She
Yeah,
would
but why does that? Why does any of
have
that
to
matter to the
explain
person
that.
who's stealing from them? Like,
Well, if they understand the role of the industrialist or the CEO's mind in
but they don't
producing these
understand that.
values,
And why should they
right?
understand
And
that? Like, understanding that would just make it harder for them to steal. By not understanding it, they get to steal and not suffer any psychological consequences from it. So they get money, they get the benefit of the stuff that they stole, and they don't get the cost of feeling guilty about it. So why should they even learn about that?
well, if they want to stick their head in the sand and
Why
not
not?
listen to the explanation, well, because I think there's probably guilt associated with that. Like if
With
you know
what?
there's potentially some information that could overturn your view, and you're just gonna um, blind yourself to it deliberately. I think that's like refusing to acknowledge the facts, and that's I think there's I think everyone has a sense that that's that's not a good way to act. You shouldn't turn off your mind. Um,
So you think it's
so
impossible to actually believe that without you know, lying to yourself in some way that creates some neuroses, which is actually going to hurt you more than whatever benefit you get from committing those crimes?
I'm not sure where we are in the dialectic here. I think if you're
I just want to know if it's right and wrong just depends on what's in your interest. Then it seems like it's not hard to imagine a situation where it's in someone's interest to do something that seems obviously wrong and that Ayn Rand would obviously consider objectively wrong, such as, you know, someone who believes that it's right, that it's justifiable to steal from some particular person or organization for some reason and does it and gets a lot of money, so they get the benefit of stealing, and they don't have the cost of this sort of internal psychological strife or whatever that, say, a normal person would have doing that because they believe that they've done the right thing. I don't understand how you would how an objectivist would convince them that what they did is wrong, or you would explain how what they did is wrong, while also saying that right and wrong is just about pursuing your self-interest. It seems like it is in their self-interest to just steal that and to commit the theft and keep believing what they believe and not try to challenge those beliefs, right? Because by challenging the beliefs, you're just risking losing your belief that that stealing is good, stealing is justified.
but you might be better off if you opened your mind and heard someone else's point of view. Maybe at
Well, why? I
first
mean, you
you
might be better
are
off, you might be worse off. All you know is that if you listen to someone who's
you
trying to
should at
convince
least
you,
give somebody a chance. So what I'm saying is if you have a sense that listening to somebody might provide you with some valuable information, and then after you start hearing her a little bit, start realizing, if I keep listening to this person, I might have to give up my practice of taking stuff away from the corporation, and that might upset me. So I'm just going to stick my head in the sand and stop listening. I think that's evasion, and that's not in your own interests. You're sacrificing
okay, fair
your
enough.
perception of reality.
Fair enough, but it does seem like there are people that are so convinced of things like that even if they like engaged enthusiastically with contrary opinions and critics and people trying to convince them that what they're doing is wrong, they still would keep believing it. Like they really, really believe it, right? It doesn't seem. It seems like it's not hard to be really deeply, sincerely convinced that stealing from big corporations is okay. So I don't think I don't think that you have to be willingly ignorant in order to believe that. I think you could easily believe that just by not being too bright, or just by being like thoroughly indoctrinated into that belief system, or just simply not having access to something, not even knowing that there's an alternative. Like a lot of people don't even know that. It doesn't even occur to them to question the beliefs because they're surrounded by people who believe the same thing, right?
I mean, if that's really the case, that you sincerely believe it's right to steal from corporations, then I guess you should do that. But I'm also going to want to try to spread the word that it's actually not. I'm going to try to make arguments to people that that's actually not the right thing to do. And I mean, that's part of what I'm trying to do with my YouTube channel and having conversations like this, is to try to give people a different way to look at things, a different way to think about corporations and
Now,
what
let's
goes
say,
into producing their values.
no, what happens if, let's say you tell them that, stealing from a corporation is stealing and it's bad. And they're like, why? I mean, if I'm just pursuing my self-interest, like, why shouldn't I steal things? Like, why, what if they just don't feel guilty about it? Like, they know everything. They know everything about economics and how corporations work and blah, blah, blah. And they don't care. They're like, yeah, I know that stuff. I know I'm doing damaging to the economy or something, but I'm getting lots of money. So who cares?
Well, if someone really knows all that goes into running a corporation, then I don't know that they could honestly think it's right.
Why not?
To steal anymore.
Well, why? But you're saying right and wrong is just about your self-interest. So all they have to believe that is right is to believe that it's in their self-interest. And it's easy to believe that even though this theft is damaging the corporation, is great for me. I'm getting a whole lot of money. It makes me real happy, and I don't really care about this corporation. So
the idea that it's okay to violate rights.
Why is it not okay to violate rights?
Well, they have. It's in their own interest to have their own rights respected.
But they're not violating their rights. They're violating someone else's rights. Why is it wrong to violate someone else's rights?
It's a principle that goes both ways. You can't say,
why does it go both ways?
I have the right to violate others' rights. That's the nature of individual rights.
But it doesn't go both. Like, you can steal from a corporation. The corporation is not necessarily going to steal from you. If you do, you sneakily steal from the corporation and get away with it, your rights are not going to be violated.
But you've abandoned the principle of.
Well, who cares? Why would I care about the principle? I care about people actually violating my rights. If no one actually violates my rights, then I don't care I don't care about the principle.
You don't care about the principle. Okay, well, I think that's
what is the principle?
Probably a problem there.
Why should I follow a principle if it seems like it's in my interest to violate it? Like, if other people will follow the principle with me, even while I violate it, then why shouldn't I violate it?
Well, if you think it's in your interest to violate a principle, then I guess you should violate it. But the point of the principle, I think, is ethics is the point of ethics. I think one way of looking at it is to come up with principles to guide us in life in dealing with various concrete situations. So if you just throw out principles, then I think you're kind of abandoning the whole sphere of ethics. If you're just
what's wrong with the principle? I try to take as much as I can from everybody else and try to trick them or say whatever I have to say to them to prevent them from taking stuff from me. What's wrong with that principle?
You try to take as much as you can from everyone else and prevent them from taking stuff from you. That's the principle.
Yeah.
Or that's what's wrong with. I think you put yourself at war with other people if that's, instead of dealing with others as a trader, where I give you something, you give me something in return, buy something from you, you give me the good, I go to McDonald's, they give me the money, they give me a hamburger.
What's wrong with being at war if I win it?
What's wrong with being at war?
If I win,
I think you're Well, I don't think you're going to. I mean, so you're basically reducing yourself to the level of animals. That's how animals interact.
So
They
what?
they deal with each other by
A rich,
force
happy animal.
rather than by persuasion and trade. So
Well, no, I'm still
you're reducing
persuading, but
yourself
I'm
to
just
the
doing
level
it.
of an animal.
I'm just tricking people. I'm tricking people into not stealing from me, but I'm still stealing from them.
And maybe you can get away with that for a while,
At
but
some level, I'll
people
be
have.
able to get away with it, and I'm choosing the level. I'm choosing the amount and how I do it, in such that I can get away with it. Right?
In Yeah, for a while maybe you can get away with it,
No,
but
forever.
psychologically, I think even in the moments, because you're abandoning a principled of approach, I think you're already suffering by doing that. So
I'm suffering by
sounds like
not.
maybe you're
So you think I'm
by
suffering just
abandoning the
by not
principle.
following, by treating others differently than I expect them to treat me?
I guess maybe, yeah. I think having that kind of attitude, I guess that could I think that could possibly ground suffering on your part, because you have a certain attitude towards human beings, which I think is not hospitable to relationships with people. I'm like I said before, I think you're basically putting yourself at war with others
Well,
rather
but
than living in
I just steal
harmony
from
with
strangers, right?
others.
I don't need to steal from my friend. Steal from people I don't have a relationship with, or steal from faceless corporations that I don't care about.
So, well, I mean, why? What's stopping you from stealing anyone, even your friend? I mean, if you're gonna
They're my friend. I don't
treat
want to.
people,
Like it, I would feel bad
are
about
they
that.
gonna? I'm not gonna want to be your friend if I know you treat
But you don't. I
people
won't tell
that
them.
way.
I'm not going
So
to tell my friends that I do that.
now you
I
have
just
to
won't
live a
steal from
life
them.
of secrecy and hide
Sure.
hide your actions.
So what?
So that's I think there's a cost doing that. You can't live openly, and you have to live in the shadows.
So what? I mean, that
About
may
who
be
knows
true,
what about your actions.
but
Keep your lies straight.
you're making very particular psychological claims, and I'm just not sure I believe them. I'm not sure, like suggesting that you will not be happy if you steal from people, even if you get away with it, even if you steal a whole lot of money, you just won't be happy. You'll just be tortured at the thought that you treat others differently than you expect them to treat you, even if they're strangers, faceless corporations you don't care about. I find it hard to believe that everyone necessarily will feel that way. I got to think that there's some people out there who could live with whatever level of sort of cognitive dissonance or psychological whatever it is in order to steal a lot of money, right? It just doesn't seem. I don't buy that people are that uh, are that have that high standards for their own psychological whatever consistency. And what about it doesn't. It's not like you have to be. It's not like you have to be in some state of cognitive dissonance. You just have to not. You just have to admit to yourself that you don't. That the golden rule is not true. That it's okay. There's nothing wrong with treating other people differently than you expect them to treat you, as long as you can get away with it. Like, and I don't see it's because it seems like Rand herself believes that, because she believes that that fundamentally morality is just about pursuing your own self-interest. Then she's almost admitting that. She's saying that these principles don't matter because she's saying you shouldn't care about other people. You should only care about yourself. So it seems weird to then say, well, but if you don't treat others the same way you treat yourself, you will be miserable. Trust me, I don't buy that. It just doesn't seem to be true.
Hold on just a second.
It's almost like she's saying that yeah, you pursue your self-interest, but it just so happens that psychologically it's in your self-interest to follow all of these really strict moral rules perfectly, and you'll just be unhappy if you don't.
Yeah, I think it. I mean, it is. She does think it's in your interest to respect others' rights, Um, I was thinking of Bernie Madoff. As you were talking, who obviously he stole from a lot of people, but
But he
look at
got
him
caught,
now.
so it's different.
Yeah, but
Like
he
I want to know.
also,
I don't want
he
to like
said
Bernie
he
Madoff's
was.
not the good
No,
example. I
hold
want to
on, hold on,
know.
hold on. He said he was miserable. I've heard this, that he felt better than he ever did before after he had come clean, and he no longer had to keep up his charades, where he could just have to be faking all the time. He said he was miserable. This is what I've heard while he was doing his whole Ponzi scheme. So I think that would be
Okay.
testament to the psychological damage of living this.
I mean that is an anecdote. But the thing is, maybe Bernie Madoff was miserable because he was in over his head, which is also why he got caught. Right. The fact that he got caught suggests that it was getting out of hand, or it was being dangerous. And if it was so dangerous, you can imagine how that would be stressing him out. So it's not obvious to me that this is always going to be the case, that someone who was committed that kind of fraud in a more careful way and didn't let it get out of hand could then be perfectly happy and relaxed and content to do it, because they wouldn't have the fear that they're about to get caught, which Bernie probably knew that he was going to get caught, and that's probably why he was relieved when he was, right? That'd be my speculation. But I mean, everyone, like so many people commit like very minor, bits of theft and fraud all throughout their life. I don't buy that they're all suffering because of that, like Bernie Madoff was, and they'd be relieved if they got caught, right?
I suspect people lose some self-respect when they do things like that. I think there's a pride on the other side of it, the flip side. I think there's a pride in earning your own way.
I think they lose
self-respect.
I think their guilt, the negative feelings they have, probably come from the fact that they accept this sort of social norms that say they shouldn't do that, because they should care about other people. They should be altruistic. And that's what makes them unhappy. It's the contradiction between their sort of the altruistic morality that they sort of believe that they believe in, and yet and then they do this bad stuff that they know violates the morality that they think they believe, and that kind of internal dissonance makes them unhappy. But Rand doesn't believe in altruism, so she actually believes that altruistic thing that most people believe isn't true, that you don't have to care about other people. So it seems like, if anything, objectivism would relieve them from the thing that is making them unhappy about committing crime.
She doesn't say you shouldn't care about others. She does think you should care about others, but it's because they are of value to you.
Only if it serves your own interest, which is not. But that's a big if, right? Not unconditional.
Right, but she does think it's in your interest to act in a principled way. And
yeah, but fundamentally, it's about your interest. You only pursue other interests as a means to your own ends, the ends of your own interest, right?
Right.
And it's clearly not.
And she argues that it is in your own interest to respect others' rights. So I mean, you could contest that argument. You could say it doesn't work, but that's the argument.
It's just not, though. Like, and I don't see how it is. That's the whole point. Like, you can come up with examples, like particular examples. Oh, look, here's a thing that you could do that was wrong. That seems like it's in your self-interest, but ultimately isn't. But it's easy to come up with examples where that's not the case. It's easy to come up with examples where it's something that Rand herself would say is wrong, but it does actually seem to serve your interest in the short term and the long term, and there's really no reason not to do it, other than some sort of altruistic morality.
Well, I would contest those examples, I guess.
We've talked about examples the whole time. I don't know why is like the example that I gave you. Why is that wrong? The example of of a person who steals from big corporation, and they get away with it. They know they got away with it, and they don't believe they don't. It doesn't contradict their morality. They don't have this internal contradiction because they actually believe in egoism. They don't believe that they have some fundamental. There's no fundamental requirement that they care about the corporation's rights. So they're like, yeah, this is in my self-interest. I'm getting away with it. It's not going to have any like tangible consequences for me, and there's no moral consequences because morally it seems fine. I'm pursuing my self-interest, and I don't see how Rand could tell that person why what they're doing is wrong.
Well, I mean, that gets back to the telling the story about the CEO. So, like, if this is a Marxist, and they've been indoctrinated from a young age into view that the corporation has no rights to their products.
But why does the corporation have rights? Why should that person care about the corporation's rights? They don't have to be a Marxist.
It's not. This goes back to the two-way thing. You don't just care about their rights. I mean, in caring about anyone's rights, you're caring about your own rights.
But that's not true. Why is that? Why is that true? Why can't you care about your own rights but not care about anybody else's rights?
It's like if one person's rights have been violated, everyone's have, in a sense, and we should all be concerned about.
But that's not true.
It's not okay with me if my neighbor gets murdered just because it wasn't me. No, it's in my interest to have rights upheld in wherever I'm living.
Why is it?
I'm not the one in a given instance who's been affected.
But this is not true. When you steal from someone else, you're not stealing from yourself. You're stealing from them. It violates their rights. It doesn't violate yours. Lots of people are being stolen from right now. It's not a problem for me.
It violates the principle of trade.
But why does the principle matter?
It endorses.
That's altruism. You're saying if I care about the principle, regardless of who's being affected by it, that's altruism.
That's the view. The view is that it's in your interest to live by principles.
Why?
So we can talk about that. So maybe that's the root issue here that we're disagreeing on. So, well, what's the alternative to acting on principles? Is it just acting without any long-range guidance?
Well, I could act on the principle that I want.
Taking each thing on a case-by-case basis.
I mean, the principle is I want the most pleasure for myself. What's wrong with that principle?
Well, I think, and it's kind of like saying the principle is pursue happiness, which Ayn Rand would say, yeah, you should do that. But we need to break that down into things that we can, like, how do you go about achieving happiness?
I steal from people who I don't know or care about and who I can get away with stealing from.
Okay, but if I don't know that's, I would contest that you're actually going to succeed in the long run, and if that's what you follow.
Surely there's many situations where you can successfully do that. I'm sure lots of people get away with theft for their entire lives. You're saying all thieves always get caught no matter what? That's not true. It's just not true.
I've said that it's not just about getting caught.
Well, then what's it about?
Your own psychological states. That's also very relevant. How do you feel about yourself?
I feel fine.
In terms of self-respect. I would contest that.
Why would that person not feel fine? I don't understand.
I think it's unjust to take something. I guess you would have to say, I feel fine taking something I didn't earn, taking away something somebody else did earn.
Who cares?
Do you really feel fine with that? So, I mean,
yeah, sure. Why not?
I guess if anyone has that attitude towards you, and
look, lots of people feel fine with that. Lots of people do it, right? All the time. It's not some weird thing.
That doesn't mean they're A-okay psychologically. A lot of people do it. People do heroin.
But if that's true, then what you're suggesting is that the only reason that theft is wrong is because you have something inside you that will punish you emotionally for doing anything wrong. to make it enough to make it not worthwhile. But that's obviously not true. People are obviously not. People's moral compasses are obviously not that reliable. They're just not. So you can't just say, well, you'll trust me, you'll feel bad if you do anything wrong that violates these principles. That's just not true.
Well, it's not. I mean, it's partly. Well, I think we would disagree on what the psychological effects of doing these actions. Perhaps.
Do you disagree with that?
But also, I said with what?
Do you disagree with me saying that our moral compasses are not absolutely perfectly flawless? That we're not like that every person is not definitely punished for committing rights violations so much that it's not worth committing any rights violations? Do you think that that's actually true or not?
I think it might vary. Like in the case of the person who's indoctrinated in Marxism from a young age, maybe that person doesn't suffer when they steal from a corporation because they're just so convinced that it's the right
that's
thing.
Like most people around me at the moment, right?
If you're just talking about, because this so-called principle that you enunciated before wasn't just stealing from corporations. You said take as much as you can from anybody
as you can get away with.
Your son, your neighbor, your girlfriend, or whatever.
No, from strangers who I don't know or care about.
Okay, so, and in that case, so
you keep trying to bring it back to situations where, like, I know you can come up with situations where there's an obvious consequence or an obvious emotional consequence or tangible consequences, but I'm saying, what about the situations where there isn't an obvious one? You got to deal with those. You can't just keep bringing it back to the easier cases. What about the hardest cases?
Well, I don't think it's that hard in the case of a stranger. If it's just like your neighbor, say.
No, not my neighbor.
From your neighbor.
Because my neighbor, I could imagine how that would be a problem, right? I have to say hi to them every day and think about them and see them like, we're missing their money. But what about the completely a stranger?
Is there really much of a difference between that person and someone a little bit further away from you and then a little bit further?
I guess.
It's just another person, right?
Sure.
So if you can see it in one case, why not in the others?
I mean, maybe I can't see it. Like, certainly
you would feel compunction.
Sure. I mean, some people could probably steal from their neighbor and feel fine, especially if their neighbor, like, they don't like their neighbor, right? Lots of people don't like their neighbor.
Okay, well, that I would contest that some people would really be just perfectly okay internally stealing from their neighbor.
Okay, what about
who's done no wrong
what about
to
a
them?
big corporation, big faceless corporation? Do you think there are some people out there who just really would never ever feel guilty about stealing from a big corporation and getting away with it?
Maybe. Like
maybe
I think in the Marxist case, if you're like,
I don't think you got to be much of a Marxist to be like that. I think probably a lot of people, large, if not the majority of people out there would be fine with that. Or if you said, hey, look, you press this button and you will get $1 million from, Amazon, and they'll never, they'll never notice it was gone, or they'll think it was just lost in some understandable way, and you'll get the money, and you'll never get caught, and no one will ever know about it. Would you press that button? I think a lot of people would press that button, and I don't think they'd feel, even if they felt guilty about it, they wouldn't feel $1 million guilty about it. They'd be like, well, I feel a bit guilty, but holy shit, it was worth it to feel this guilt.
I'm not sure what to say about that case. It's that's kind of strange because it's pretty sci-fi. Just pushing a button and you get $1 million. I guess maybe you could make it realistic if you filled in the details enough. But
and people who embezzle from companies and basically do something very similar, right? Bernie Madoff is not far. Okay, well, Madoff is off for that because he got caught, but there's lots of smarter Madoffs out there who get away with that stuff,
right? I doubt well, I don't know. Like, I don't know how to quantify the percentage of people who embezzle who are perfectly okay with doing that. Maybe there are some. I don't know how many. Maybe not that many. I don't know. But I mean, if it's that sort of case where I guess that's a more abstract kind of case than when you're just stealing from your neighbor, because there has been a lot of propaganda or indoctrination or just bad teaching about, in my view, about corporations.
I don't think that matters, though. I don't think it matters whether
evil.
people know about corporations or not, because I think even if people knew even if people knew everything about corporations, they would still steal. They'd be still okay about stealing from them, right? And I don't think knowing about them really makes much of a difference.
I don't think so. I think if you had like Ayn Rand's perspective on corporations and you understood the role of the mind, and
you don't think someone who like
everything that goes
understood
into-
economics perfectly and understood Amazon perfectly would you think somehow that would make it so they would not be willing to press that button and steal $1 million and never get caught?
At least I don't think they could press it and have no bad psychological effects from doing so.
But $1 million worth of bad psychological effects?
Yeah. I don't think any amount of money would make it worth.
So they'd push the button and then they'd feel like so bad that they'd have to give the money back.
I mean, I think they would. It would be a net negative. I'll put it that way. To press the button, if you knew everything.
So you're saying if they had then presented them with another button that puts the money back and gives it back to Amazon and undoes it, they would definitely press that other button too.
I don't know if they would, but I think they would be better off. Like they might be just like you might eat cheesecake just on weakness of will, even though you know it's not good for you to eat the cheesecake because you're going to get a heart attack or something.
So you're saying
might still eat the cheesecake.
if they pressed the second button, they would be glad that they did.
Yeah, I think so.
And they wouldn't be like, holy shit, I just gave up $1 million.
No, I think they would be proud of themselves.
I don't think you're right. I think there's a lot of people who would press that first button, be perfectly fine, would be net better off with those $1 million. And if they press the second button, they'd be kicking themselves and miserable the rest of their life knowing about it. Just imagine people who, I mean, any normal person, but if it helps, like imagine people who are poor and having a lot of trouble with money, and like all the things that all the suffering they could avoid by taking that $1 million from Amazon. I mean, I don't buy that. Like if that's the argument that objectivism makes, that you shouldn't violate rights because you will regret it. If that's what objectivism is, it's not very persuasive, right? Because it just doesn't seem to be true.
Well, I don't think it doesn't seem to be true. It doesn't seem to you to be true, but that's where the argument is. There's a lot of argument that goes into.
I think it's objectively untrue. I think there's a lot of people.
Okay, well,
I think there's a lot of people who, if they did not follow the principles of objectivism and did do things like steal, would be happy. It would be in their self-interest to do so.
I think I don't think so. If they knew about the principles of objectivism and they read Ayn Rand, they understood the arguments, and then they still stole, I do not think they would be doing what's in their interest.
I think that reading objectivism would make them miserable if they stole.
Yeah, I think so. Not that you have to read objectivism, and it's not like.
And
if
they don't read objectivism,
find out that it's bad to steal.
Well, wait a minute. I mean,
there's other ways to learn this stuff. It's not. You don't have to read Ayn Rand to some of these principles that you feel.
But
more
the thing is,
self-respect
if you have to read something to know why you should feel guilty about stealing the money,
it's super clear.
then you also have to deal with the question: why should I read that thing then? Because then you also have to say, well, you'll feel even worse if you don't read it. But that doesn't seem to be true.
Sticking the head in the sand kind of thing.
Well, so why not stick your head in the sand?
That's not in your.
Like we're not talking about complete ignorance. We're just talking about not reading objectivism. I can still read lots of other stuff.
You're thinking like you're taking the attitude that I'm going to be better off blind than seen. Sticking your head. You're not looking at.
I'm
the
not
facts.
blind just because I don't read objectivism, though. I can read lots of stuff. I just don't have to read the one book which might make me feel guilty about stealing. and just keep stealing.
I mean, if you have reason to think that looking at something is going to convince you that rationally you shouldn't be doing it, and then you just choose not to look at that because you think it might knock down your arguments, I think that's not really a healthy way to approach life.
So you're saying that I'm going to feel worse if I don't read it. If I don't read the thing that makes me feel bad about what I'm doing. If I read the book, I'll feel bad about stealing the $1 million. So bad that I'll have to give the $1 million back. But I'll feel even worse if I don't read the book. What if I don't even know about the book?
No, I think if you read the book, you'll feel worse than if you don't read the book, because the book makes it so clear. It's so blazingly clear.
So why would I? So why would I read the book then? You're saying I'll feel bad if I don't read the book, but if I read the book, I'll have to give up my $1 million. So
there's also an upside to reading the book.
Is it worth $1 million to read the book?
Maybe worth much more than $1 million. It gives you
or maybe not.
Right to life.
How many objectivists make more than $1 million from reading the book?
This reminds me of I think it's a line from Jesus. What profiteth a man to gain the whole world if you lose your soul? Something like that.
Gain the whole world.
And I think there's.
What do you mean lose your you lose your soul if you don't? If you don't read,
you're well, that's the blinding yourself part. You're like, you have to delude yourself in order to go through with what you're doing.
Okay, so what if you want to read everything you possibly can, and you'd love to read about objectivism if you knew about it, but you don't? What if this person steals? They press the button, they get $1 million, and they've never heard of objectivism. They never heard of the book that explains why they should feel guilty about this, so they don't, and they don't even know that. They don't even know about the book to be ignorant about it. They think that they're completely open to everything, and it's just no one told them about the book. Then it seems like ignorance is bliss. It seems like they're happy. They keep the $1 million because they don't know. They don't know enough to feel guilty about it, and they don't know that they don't know that they're supposed to feel guilty.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they would be as bad off in that case if they're not evading something. Like, they don't know it exists to evade. So
then shouldn't we not tell them about it? Well, I guess we could tell them about it.
You have a manual on what are what are poisonous foods and what are not poisonous foods, and you're better off knowing about this book that tells you which one is which. So,
but it's not poison if you don't know about it. It only poisons you if you know.
Well, no.
That it's poison.
But I think there are going to be bad consequences. Like, if you're draining the corporation, not as directly obvious as like eating a poisonous food where you have immediate sickness or death even. But if you act in certain ways, like you're taking money from corporations, you're slowing down productivity, and then
for the corporation,
not going to be
not for you.
It'll descend to a third world.
Yeah, but you'll be better off. Society might.
In a short run, maybe in a short run sense, but long run, no.
No. Long run, you're going to be up $1 million. You might be down a few cents because of the damage you've done to society or the economy, but it's still going to be a net financial win for you, right? It's not going to cost you more than $1 million. Because of the effect you've had on society of stealing that $1 million from Amazon, who has like $1 trillion literally of capital. So I mean, it's like you're miserable if you violate the principles, but only if you know the principles, or you know that the principles exist and you're refusing to read about them. But if you don't even know that the principles exist, and you don't even know there's something that you should be reading that you haven't read, then you're fine. Then you can violate people's rights and you don't feel guilty about it because you don't even know that you're supposed to feel guilty about it. So then, is it okay? Is it right to steal the money as long as you are completely ignorant of the principles that say that you shouldn't do it? And you don't even have the opportunity to find out about those principles.
I guess. I mean, if you have like no inkling that there's anything wrong with what you're doing, then I guess it's okay. But
Because that's not even far fetched, right? There's a lot of people who
uh,
don't who never even heard of objectivism, who, I never heard about it, or even if they heard the name, like they don't know, like knowing that you need to read that and that it's going to be relevant to what you do. How do you know that, right? It seems like it's easy to get for some person to come to a place where they haven't read. They may know about Ayn Rand, but they haven't read any Ayn Rand, and they're not miserable. They're not being made miserable because they haven't read it, right? It seems easy to. It seems like there are a lot of people who are not miserable just because they haven't read Ayn Rand, and maybe that's because they don't know how great Ayn Rand is.
But I don't know if there's a lot of people who are not miserable who are also embezzling millions of dollars from corporations.
I think there are. I think there's plenty of people who are stealing in that way. Maybe not a million, maybe less, but they're stealing. They're violating people's rights left and right, in situations where they can get away with it, and where it seems, and where they don't really care, where there's no real practical consequences for them, and they're benefiting from it. It's in their self-interest to do that.
I don't think so. But maybe we're going in circles at this point, or we've got as far as we can on this for now. I don't know what more I could add at this point.
I guess not.
Do you, maybe people could just read Ayn Rand for themselves and decide if she has a good argument for this.
I guess so.
Respecting people's rights.
Unless you're a career criminal, then it seems like it's just gonna fuck you up. Or you'll realize how miserable you actually were, and you didn't realize it. Invite Aaron Brook to the show. You ever talk to Aaron Brook?
Yeah, I've talked to him. Not on my YouTube channel, but I've met him through I've met him at events, and I used to work with him actually at the Ayn Rand Institute. I was there for a while. While he was CEO, and I still see him from time to time at events.
Most of what I know about objectivism is from him. Like I've been subscribed to him on YouTube for a while, and I've heard lots and lots of him talk about this lots and lots. I mean, he probably had a big influence on me becoming sort of libertarian in general, but he failed to turn me into an objectivist. But I mean, I still like the guy. I like the way he talks. He's very good at talking about, he's talking about economics, talking about capitalism. He's very good at that. Someone is saying in chat he has the answer to all this. He wants me to read it. So let's see. He says, no, the issue here is self-esteem. Theft undermines your self-esteem because you know that you could never produce and earn that money on your own. Self-esteem is an essential, non-negotiable requirement for successful living. There's a difference between living and getting away with living. Life lived on stolen achievements is life of self-doubt, anxiety, and nihilism. Irrespective of whether or not you have Red Atlas Shrugged, the thing that motivated you to steal in the first place was clear knowledge that you could not have produced that value yourself. Therefore, you have to steal it. The person living that life was already living a life of self-doubt, self-loathing, and living without pride, without a self. What do you think of that?
It sounded pretty good. I was a bit distracted as you were reading it because I was trying to find the chat myself. But yeah, I think a lot of that rings true to me, and it sounds like I don't know if that's an objectivist talking, but certainly somebody influenced by objectivism. Yeah, I think it does speak to the kind of character you have, and shows some kind of weird. I just found the comment here. Yeah, I think you do get self-esteem when you earn your own way instead of living as a parasite on others, and being in the condition where you didn't achieve that, but you know you're living as a parasite. I don't think that's good for your psychological well-being. Um, so yeah, I agree with that comment.
But what if, I mean, so we're talking about $1 million worth of damage to your self-esteem if you steal $1 million. It's got to be more than $1 million worth of damage. Seems like a lot. And the thing is, like, what if you use that $1 million to do stuff that raises your self-esteem, right? What if you use that $1 million and you go and start a business and make a bunch of trains or whatever, start a railroad, and that raises your self-esteem. I mean, is it okay then? Is it justifiable? I don't know. Maybe Rand would say it is if you produce more than what you stole in productivity, but it still doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem to justify the theft, or does it?
Yeah, I think the right thing to do would be to return the money rather than to
But does that make it okay?
invest it in something else and then try to make up the self-esteem. Does engaging in these productive enterprises make it okay, or does what make it okay? Stealing okay?
If you steal the
That's
money
right.
and pay it back later, let's say with interest,
I mean, I think that's the just thing to do.
is that just?
It's the proper thing to do. Yeah, I think justice. If we understand justice as giving people what they deserve, and I think person from whom you stole the money is the one who deserves that money. So I think it is just to
I suppose
return
that
the
is
money.
just. I suppose it's the same as paying a fine or paying a penalty, like, or compensating them for the crime, paying it back with interest. Okay. I
By the
still
way, how many people are in your chat? I'm trying to. I didn't see that.
7, not a lot.
Just curious. It is. I see some of the chatters, but I don't see like an overall number. So
7 viewers.
Okay.
It says what it says
Oh,
on my
chatters.
dashboard.
Okay.
It still seems. It still doesn't seem like. It seems like there's situations where the damage to your self-esteem from stealing is worth the benefit of what you stole. Like if stealing is going to like save your life, or
Well, in that case, actually, I think if stealing is going to save your life, Rand talks about this in emergency situations. It is morally justified to steal. Like if you're going to die if you don't steal a loaf of bread, because maybe innocently you washed up on a shore, or let's say you're trying to get out of communist Cuba or something, and you swim through shark-infested waters to get to Miami, and you're gonna die if you don't like grab some food after you arrive. Okay, go ahead, grab the food, steal it if necessary, and then try to make up for it later. Once you get settled and stabilize a little bit, and then try to make it up. But yeah, if it's an emergency situation, it's literally an issue of life or death, and it would be justified. But we don't live in an emergency situation, so it's not generally okay to take people's things without their consent. But in rare situations, it is moral to do, provided you try to make it up to them.
I also wonder about people who have really low self-esteem no matter what. Like, if you're like what's his name, Howard Rourke, then I can see why if you stole you would feel real bad about it. But if you're someone who you know, and you know that you are not a productive person, that you're never gonna really have a lot of self-esteem because you're just not productive. You're not gonna build any railroads or anything like that, and that you're not going to achieve anything, and it's just sort of obvious. Then at that point, it doesn't seem like stealing is going to make things much worse for your self-esteem.
Well, I think it does make things worse. I don't know how much worse, but I think it entrenches your low self-esteem. Whereas I think part of the reason has self-esteem, high self-esteem, is because he doesn't engage in things like stealing. And I think
Well,
the
but he's
only
also
way to
very
earn
productive,
your
right?
self-esteem,
Like it helps that he's
yeah, that's a huge part of it, being productive. And I think that's something anyone can do, and we all have different ability levels, but you
well,
don't
it's not
have
something
to
anyone can
be a
do, right?
productive genius in
There's
order
people who are
to
not as smart as Howard Roark.
support yourself. Sure, but you don't have to be a genius to support yourself. You could be a, trash man or something, trash collector, or rake leaves or whatever, and support yourself.
I mean, if you're real dumb,
Someone who does that is going to have much more self-respect, I think, than someone who is much wealthier, but he got his money fraudulently through stealing, like Bernie Madoff.
like there's going to be people who are dumb enough that even trying as their hardest to make an honest living is going to leave them with not a very wealthy life, right? They're not going to have much, and it's still going to be really hard. And it seems like, and they're going to be miserable knowing that, because it'll always be obvious to them that they're a lot less, inherently less productive than everyone else, because they just don't have the inherent,
I don't think
talent.
that's gonna hurt your self-esteem, knowing that you're not as productive as other people. I think what will hurt your self-esteem is knowing that you got your whatever you do have dishonestly. If you know that you earned whatever you have, however little or much that is, I think it gives you self-esteem. Also, I think it's very easy to survive if we have a society in which capitalist society where rights are respected. I mean, quote, poor people today have iPhones. They're living richer than kings did 5 centuries ago. So I think, especially in today's world, it's extremely easy to survive, even if you do have very limited abilities. Even if you're a disabled person, you could do data entry, for instance, and support yourself by doing that. So it's become so easy to survive because we are so advanced, and I think we would be even further along if we had a society that respects rights more than it already does. I think today we've abandoned the principle of rights to a great extent. I mean, there's a lot of taxes and regulations, which I think are regulations of rights respecting society, and if we didn't have those, I think we would be much further along. Maybe we would have flying cars by now. Maybe poor people would have flying cars by now. I think it's a pretty simple, maybe I would even say trivial thing to be able to support yourself in today's world. If we didn't have things like minimum wage laws that are preventing people from doing very simple, low-paying jobs.
It seems like
so
I'm thinking about a
no.
person who
Go ahead.
was terrible at everything they do except for stealing. They're really good at stealing.
Come on.
They'll
How realistic is that? All you can do to survive is steal. If you can steal, you can rake leaves.
Well, but what you can steal a lot? What you can make more stealing than you can raking leaves? And what if you're really good at it? And it's difficult. Like
Sure,
you just
but then I think you run into all the psychological damage of living dishonestly.
I don't know. It seems like
not getting the self-respect.
It seems like I can imagine people who would actually raise their self-esteem by through committing crime because they're so good at it, and they actually feel like they're being productive. They feel like they're good at it,
It's not
right?
Producing is when you create the value, not when you steal it from someone else who has created the value.
I mean, I know that, but I don't think everyone really understands that. And I think it's probably easy for someone to convince themselves that they're a productive criminal.
I don't think so. I think it's pretty easy for everyone to understand what's going on when you're a criminal. Is you're taking.
You don't think like some guy who's like a super hacker, and he's like, and he does some crazy super sophisticated hack and ends up transferring all this money to his bank account, and he feels so super smart because of it, and he gets to brag to all his hacker friends. You think, yeah, you're so cool. You don't think that guy is raising his self-esteem by doing that?
Not on net. I think he might get a rush of pleasure. Look at this clever thing that I did, or any bank robber who pulls off some heist. But I think on net, that's going to be outweighed by the lack of self-respect um, that he experiences. To say nothing of being caught if he actually does get caught. But just psychologically, I think he's going to suffer. Although I think, yeah, at the same time, he might get a little dopamine rush from his heist, but on that, I don't think he's better off, even psychologically.
Okay, so you pay the price in self-esteem for any unjust thing that you acquire, and by reading Ayn Rand, you will realize that in advance so that you don't make that mistake. Is that basically?
I think she makes it more clear. Like, I don't think it's not like, for all the millennia prior to Ayn Rand's, people didn't feel any deficit of self-esteem when they acted in this kind of short-range way of just grabbing what you can instead of respecting rights. But I think she just makes a full philosophical case that makes it much, much more obvious the wrongness of doing something like that. So I don't think you needed it to get the idea that it's not good for yourself psychologically to steal.
No.
But I think it would be worse after reading Ayn Rand. Like, I think if I stole now, I would be suffer more than if I stole, I was 10 years old. But I think even when I was 10 years old and I never even heard of Ayn Rand, I would still feel kind of guilty. I would feel bad about stealing. Even though I might have also got a little dopamine rush from pulling something off, I think I would have some sense that, this was not the right thing to do.
I mean, I have to admit, that's why I don't steal, because, every opportunity I've had to steal, it was really obvious to me that the guilt would be, would be worse. The guilt would not be worth whatever I was stealing. But that's never been very much. So I don't know. If it was like $1 million from Amazon, then I don't know if I would still feel that way. But maybe I would. I don't know.
Interesting. Interesting that you say that you haven't stolen because you think the guilt would outweigh the value of what you've taken. I think that integrates with my way and Ayn Rand's way of looking at it.
I mean, that's only like I've never had the chance to steal a lot, right?
I wonder if it would be worse though, because you're stealing a lot more. Like, would you feel worse by stealing 1 penny from somebody or stealing $1 million from someone?
I would. Well, I mean, it depends. I think I would feel worse stealing from a poor person than a rich person. So if I was stealing $1 million from a company that has $1 trillion, I would not feel as bad as if I was stealing $1 million from some middle class person. And so I'm not sure if I would feel, so guilty about it that I wouldn't do it.
If it's degrees of badness, I think, yeah, I mean, different cases, I think one would feel different degrees of badness, but I think, I think that in any case, you're throwing out the principle of respecting rights. So I think there's already grounds to feel bad, no matter how much it is you're stealing. But sure, yeah, the greater the amount, I think more grounds there are to bad. And how much the person has could also factor into the level of guilt. If you're stealing $1 million from a gazillionaire versus from a millionaire, I can see how that could affect your level of guilt. But I think the important thing to hear is that it's bad and that you're going to feel bad to some degree. That's the point I would argue is most important.
To some degree, sure, but it's bad enough that I wouldn't do it. That's the real question.
And Okay, yeah. Well, I guess if it's not an emergency case, I would say all of these cases, I would argue, are bad enough that you shouldn't do it. Or at least in my case, I would say they're all bad enough that I wouldn't do it.
Okay.
Only in the emergency case.
I gotta feed this cat.
Then I don't need $1 million to out of an emergency. Cat wants to take part in the conversation.
Cat wants to eat. She's going to eat me if I don't feed her something else. So, I mean, I think we covered the topics we wanted to. What do you think? Anything
we
else?
didn't get to anarchy, but
No.
maybe another time we could do that if you wanted to wrap it up.
Yeah, I'd be down for that. All right.
Okay. I've actually I was just reading some about anarchy because it's not something I've thought a whole lot about, but yeah, maybe I'll do a little more prep for that on that topic if we do this again sometime.
Sure.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yep. Good to talk to you, man.
Yeah, you too.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.